Hi, hello. My name is Jair Torres, and I'm here now giving you the presenting the last video of Module 4 on a school disaster risk management. This Module 4 will be talking about the contingency plans. So we have seen already the school disaster risk management plan and the different plans that are part of this big school disaster risk management plan that are the standard operation procedures, the evacuation plan, and now we're going to be talking about contingency plan. Also, remember that the maintenance plan, something that we discussed on when we were talking about pillar number 1 on safe learning facilities, is part of this school disaster risk management plan. But now we're going to be talking about the contingency plan. That is something that is about the response and sometimes overlaps with the recovery. And it's about how to resume, how we can secure education continuity as much as possible without avoiding longer disruptions of the education services, because we have seen since the first modules how disruptions on the education services can really produce a lot of problems in education continuity, but also in the other spheres of the society, like health issues, economic issues, etc., etc. So, when we are talking about contingency planning, there are some authors or some institutions that also consider the contingency planning as the continuity of operation procedure. And they describe it as a management process that analyzes disaster risk and establish arrangements in advance to enable timely, effective, and appropriate response. Normally, contingency planning results in organized and coordinated courses of actions with clearly identified institutional roles and resources, information processes, and operational arrangements for specific actors at times of need. Based on scenarios of possible emergency conditions or hazardous events, it allows key actors to envision, anticipate, and solve problems that can arise during disasters, and that at the same time can set up the basis for securing the education continuity. It's an important part of overall preparedness because we need to prepare for the times of emergencies. And they need to be regularly updated and exercised like we normally do with the other plans that we saw before of the evacuation, the standard operation procedures, and the big school disaster risk management plan. So, what are the purpose of having these contingency plans? The first purpose is to ensure that there are procedures in place to maintain or rapidly resume essential operations, in this case, the education services, within the school after an incident that results in disruption of normal activities or service to the schools. So the education services, remember that we saw that on the first model, that one of the big rights that we like to keep is the right to education and the importance of the right to education. So we need to prepare that in order to make that the right to education will be the less affected as possible due to the disruption occasioned by any specific hazard. So this is the main purpose that we want to put here. Then it relies on a strong internal external communication. It's important the partnership internally at the schools, but also externally with other people, other systems, and other authorities, local and national, because most of the time they're gonna drive the decision and they're gonna inform if what will need to be done. And also with contractors and organizations. We're going to see that because we need to have partnerships already with people that can come quickly to the schools and solve the issues that the impact of the hazard produce in our schools. This with the idea to quickly recover following the incident. As well, if we failure to maintain these critical services will significantly affect the education and or service mission of the school in an adverse way. Not only the education service will be compromised, but all of the activities that take place in the school will be compromised. For instance, meetings of the community, if the schools use like the sport. So we need to also try to make those valuable role that the schools play in the communities to try to continue their operations as soon as possible. Other element here is that it outlines actions needed to maintain and rapidly resume essential academic, business and physical service after an incident. So in this case, it will be mainly academic, but there are other elements that we need as a schools to provide and some kind of physical services that can be approved, that are provided in the schools. So for the contingency plus, there are different kind of responsibilities for different kind of people. Of course, this responsibility, this is not written on a stone, but normally there are major responsibilities that can be provided to specific actors. For instance, the principal or the head of the schools. He is the person that determines when to close schools and or send students and staff to alternate locations. And normally, this determination comes from a local or national authority, but also by his own reasoning about, okay, maybe the school is not safe, and we need to try to see if we need to go to an alternative location, being that taking into consideration that it's really damaged and can produce a lot of problems to the kids, to the children, and to the teachers and administrative staff. He is in charge of disseminate information internally to the students, of course, and to the whole staff. So it will be the person that will really get the information and disseminate this information, that will communicate with parents, with media, and with the larger school community. So all the people that are taking that take benefit from the school that we have mentioned previously. Identify a line of succession, including a time of succession, including who is responsible for restoring which business functions for a school's district. So he is the person that they need to start thinking about, okay, who I need to contact in order that the school will be back on track as soon as possible. So those contractors that I have already listed, the local authorities who will provide the budget, the national authorities that are doing different elements. So this is very important in the responsibilities of the principal. Who else has responsibilities here? The assistant to the principal and the department of heads. So they need to ensure that systems are in place for rapid contract execution after an incident. So they really need to facilitate that all of the reparations, all of the elements that need to be developed in order to put the school back on track are there. So they need to facilitate this. They need to identify relocation areas for classrooms and administrative operations, either internally within the school. Sometimes there are some parts that are damaged, other ones that are not. So they need to start thinking about how to relocate or do the setup, the resetup of the whole classrooms in order that they can do, or they can start facilitating together with the principal other locations where the services of education needs to be taking place. They need to help to create a system for registering students out of district or into alternative schools. So we need to know where we're going to put some students. We're going to put them, all of them together in another school, in another facility that is not a school, or if we need to split them in different groups for different areas, and they need to follow up to that the registration on and securing the safety of these students. They need to brief and train staff regarding their additional responsibilities. So as head of departments and an assistant of the principal, they need to take into consideration all the training that will be necessary and that we will mention before. They need to secure and provide the needed personnel, equipment and supplies, facilities, resources, and service required for continue the operation. So for instance, for the administrative people, so they need to know they will need a computer, they will need the software of the school, they will need other elements, so they need to supply these kind of issues. They need to identify strategies to continue teaching. For instance, using the internet in case of lockdowns. So how are we going to do it? Provide tutors to homebound students, rearranging tests, reevaluating the curriculum, trying to use a modified curricula or a smaller curricula based on some regulations that has been provided by local authorities or by the national authorities. Who else has responsibilities here? But those that are custodians or the personnel that is in charge of maintenance. So they need to work with local government officials to determine when it is safe for students and staff to return to the school buildings and grounds. So they need to check that really all of the issues that we saw after the impact of the hazard has been solved and that really is safe to come back. They need also to manage the restoration of school buildings and grounds. So sometimes we don't need big contractors to come and repair what has been damaged. Sometimes there are some debris that only need to be removed. Sometimes there are some small repairs. So the maintenance team of the schools, if we have one or if we don't have one, and we have to live with one provided by the local authorities, so they are in charge of doing these reparations that are important to reestablish the service of education. Who else has responsibilities? The school secretary or the office staff. So now they need to maintain the inventory of the school. So they have to be shared what was damaged, what was not damaged. Maintain essential records and copies of records, including schools' insurance policies, etc., etc. So all the the important information about kids, students, teachers, payrolls, etc. They need to have that. They have to ensure redundancy of records. They have to ensure that the redundancy of records is kept at a different physical location. So they need to see, in case that something happened in my school, I have to have some copies, maybe with the local authorities, maybe in another schools, maybe I have a backup, on a USB, or I have a backup on the cloud. So all of these things need to be thinking about the redundancy of opportunities to back up all the important information that the school need to have. They need to restore administrative and record keeping functions such as payroll, accounting, and personal records, as I already mentioned. Retrieve, collect, and maintain personal data is very important, for social security aspects, for payroll aspects. Provide accounts payable and cash management service for all of those services that they are normally paid and that they cannot be avoided, or those that are going to be implemented and that are under the responsibility of the schools. The counselor, the social workers, and school nurses and health assistants, they need to establish academic and support services for students and staff faculty. That will include, for instance, getting in contact with the students, with teachers, with administrative people in order to see if they need health or psychological support, and trying to see if the school can provide it itself, or if they need to liaise, for instance, with local authorities or local health providers in order to secure that kids are in a good shape. Remember that psychological safety is very important as well, and notably after any catastrophic event. Also, the people from the food service, cafeteria, and workers, they need to determine how transportation and for services will resume, either in the schools or in the place where they're gonna be, so how we can secure that the food and nutrition elements will be provided there, and how, when we're gonna go back to our schools, how the things are working properly, the fridge, the storage room, etc., etc. Remember that in most of the places, not in most of the places, but in many places of the world, schools are the only place where kids get nutrition components. So this role is very important, because we need to see that if we are not even in our own school, if we are moving to other school, that we can secure the nutrition components for those students in case that we have this kind of programs there. So, as always, we have some steps here on this contingency planning. So the first step is the activation and relocation or lockdown. So the principal or designate with the delegated authority, remember that sometimes the principal could be also impacted by the hazard. So we need to have, something that we saw before on the SOPs, the designated authority that will be if the principal is not there. And they need to activate the plan, and they need to determine whenever it is determined the school is not suitable for safe occupancy or functional operation. So for instance, COVID-19, it was something that we saw. We have a national legislation or a national directive that says schools will be locked down. But the principals need to liaise with these local authorities and national authorities in order to secure that even if the schools will be locked down, the service of education will continue being provided. So it's very important. He will be activated, and he will determine if we're going to do a relocation, maybe internally in the school or out of the school, or if we're going to do a lockdown because maybe we cannot go to another place like it happened with COVID-19. Second step, alert, notification, and implementation process. So each core member of those that we have been designated before will be part of the telephone tree used to notify administrative staff and teachers of the activation and provide situation information as available. Parents and guardians will be alerted and notified. So we have the core members of the group that will be providing and that have the roles and responsibilities to contact the other staff, the other teachers, the other school community, and that will also be communicating with parents and with guardians in order to inform about the situation and to keep it updated. It's going to be by email, it's going to be by telephone in some countries. Some communities or in some areas, they don't have access to ITs, so telecommunications and information or digital solutions. So we need to try to be as much resilience as possible, securing the redundancy principle that we saw on module number 2. We were talking about resilience. So redundancy is very important here. Then relocation sites. So relocation sites are identified as locations to establish management and to implement essential functions. So they are not talking, we are not talking here about where the education service will be implemented, but we are talking, when we discuss about relocation sites, where the management of the schools, including these local authorities, these members of the committees, can meet to discuss about the essential elements and about the implementation of the plans. So each school site will have more than one potential relocation site. For each site, the essential resources, equipment, software that will be necessary for the management of the operations need to be identified and developed in order to, and included in the plan in order to secure those resources, etc. And for instance, the alternative curriculum, we need to know on those resources that are going to be there, but the relocation sites will be for the management of the crisis, let's say. And then we have the next is to designate these alternate facilities and strategies. So we need to know what are the contingent alternative facilities. It's going to be another school, it's going to be the National Library or the local library, it's going to be a club, it's going to be a community center. And each of the alternative facilities, including the home-based education, as we saw in COVID, need as well to have the essential resources and equipment in order to restart the education on those alternative facilities. So we're going to have, for instance, all the material that we have on that other schools or on the library or on the community building. If we are making education being home-based, like in the lockdown of the COVID, so how are we going to provide information to the students? Is going to be only by internet? If it's going to be only by internet, by virtual classrooms, are my students, they have a computer, they have internet connections? I need to get to know, that the alternative facilities has all the resources to secure the education services. The step number 5, vital records and retention files. So we need to maintain all the vital records in order to be archived, regularly updated, and retained on backup data systems and stored offsite. So all of these records that we normally take when we have on our site, we need to see how we're going to keep those records in order that the fact that we are in another location will not interrupt the tracking of the students, the tracking of the teachers, of the rest of the staff. So we need to see how we're going to track those records, those files, including files regarding the progress of the students on the learning outcomes, something that we will see on the next model. The human capital management as well. We need to do an assessment of the entire human resources of the school. And that should be done. We need to know, for instance, if some calamities has been happening, if somebody from my staff has injured and cannot restore the service. And we need to have a strategy in order that after we have identified these human resources needs, we have a strategy for hiring extra staff, and that should be into place. And all personnel, and this is very important, are also encouraged to ensure their families' well-being before, during, and after a disaster strike. And this is something that we need to take into consideration when we are planning that, either at the school level, but also at the local and at the national level. Sometimes teachers or administrative staff they were not hurt in the impact of the hazard, but some of their family members, they were their children. So they will not be on the mental capacity to go back to school and to be fully operational because they have other elements to take into consideration. And that human capital element is very important to take into consideration. Remember that above everything, we are human beings and we are trying to build a better human beings in our education system. So this is something that we need to take into consideration when we are developing contingency plan. Then securing main school facility. So we need to establish contact with local authorities in order to determine the functionality and safety of the school, our actual school. So we need to see if the local authorities, they are really taking care of the reparation of the school, if the responsibilities of the same school. So they need to be discussing with contractors to see if all of the elements has been repaired, are solved. They need also to get in contact with, for instance, water and sanitation authorities. This is something that nowadays, after COVID, there are many people doing these things, listening with local authorities and national authorities to say, look, we want a safe protocol to go back to schools, but water and sanitation is not provided in my school. So we need to secure that all of the elements that are essential to secure the safety of the kids and the safety of the schools are in place. So that will mean, as I mentioned before, contacting WASH authorities, contacting Minister of Telecommunications or Minister of Public Works, contractors that will develop these specific works, insurance companies that maybe, if it's the responsibility of the school, they can start reimbursing for those elements that we need to set. So we need to secure the main school facility, and all of the process needs to be there. Then the reconstitution. So we need, in a way, when all of this response and recovery process has finished, normally we expect that will be as soon as possible in order to bounce back in a timely manner, as we have mentioned, of the concept of resilience. We need to inform the staff that the threat or incident no longer exists and provide instructions for the resumption of normal operations. And after the staff has, being instructed and you go back to school and check that everything is good, then we go to students and we restore the education service as soon as possible. All of the time informing community, informing parents, informing all of the different partners that are part of the school. Remember that the school is not the building itself, is not the student itself, is not the teacher itself, is the whole community that is around the schools that need to be involved on all of this process. And at the end, one of the final and important elements, like in every single plan, is the need to revise the plan and update the contingency plan. What were good, what didn't work in a good way, how we can really improve the plan in order that if another event occurs, we can really go and recover, pass from the emergency rapidly to the response, rapidly to the recovery, and go back to the normal stage that we were before the event occurs. So another important elements to take into consideration when we are doing contingency planning and preparedness that are very, very important. We need to identify who the most vulnerable children will be in the case of schools being closed because of the disaster or because they are going to another place, and we know that some of the children are vulnerable with people that they don't know. So we need to understand all of these different elements, as well as people with disabilities, in order to determine what would happen in another school, but also, for instance, what happens if they're gonna be at home. So we need to see the vulnerability of those kids and try to understand as well their context in order to determine if we need to redouble efforts in order to avoid the dropout from the education service. COVID showed us a lot of issues like that. There were on many countries on which one the fact that kids were at home, they really drop out from the education system. And also they drop out and they were doing other things. They were in some of the elements, as I mentioned on module number 1, recruited by illegal groups. So we need to see what are the vulnerable kids, the vulnerable groups, including vulnerable staff and teachers, in order to determine better strategies to secure that kids are safe and we keep the school safety as much as possible and education system as much as possible. Ideally, prior to any closure, teachers should obtain the phone numbers of the parents, of course, caregivers of the children in the class, and create WhatsApp groups. This is a strategy. Or other communication applications to facilitate discussions, check in on the children's programs, and share more assignments, or sometimes share information about when the schools will be reopened, about what are the different directrices that has been provided by the Minister of Education, by the local authorities, etc., etc. Sometimes it's possible visit or call homes where parents, guardians are unable to come to the school. So for those cases where you see that there is a dropout or they are not following the classes, give a call, pay a visit if possible, if the conditions allow it, in order to try to get a better understanding about the situation and trying to find strategies, tailor-made strategies for those specific kids. Ensure referral mechanisms are in place for mental health, psychological support that are important. COVID shows us that, how kids are suffering because of the lockdowns, the lack of seeing their friends, the lack of social contact, of playing with others, that have created some elements that we need to take into consideration during the time that the contingency is happening, like the response and the recovery. And those are elements that we need to take into consideration, because if we want to build back better and bounce in a better way, we need to be sure that we can do it in a way that we understand what are the issues that are happening in the head and in the minds of our kids. If safe to do so, hold parents' evenings to discuss the plan and widely communicate plans to give parents and caregivers the necessary time also to plan for them. For instance, let's say that not in the context of COVID, that we can meet because it was an earthquake, the school was, we didn't have any problem with any injury or death, but the school was kindly affected. So we need to inform the parents what are the plans, how the school could be, how the school will be retrofitted, repaired. If we can involve them on that, that will be very important, as we saw in the community-based safe school construction approach, but also for them to prepare, because sometimes if we need to put kids on another neighborhood, so maybe sometimes they need to prepare some logistics in order to bring the kids to another neighborhood. Maybe they cannot do it because of war, etc., etc. So we need to give information to parents and caregivers in order that they can plan with some anticipation in order to see what are the different timelines that we are planning on this contingency plan. Also hold remote meetings with the governance bodies in order to see what is the strategy at the local or at the national level. It's very important, and on that it's very important also that the school disaster risk management committee will be on that, the board of governors. All of this in order to try to understand what are the strategies that are being taken at the local or national level and how those strategies will affect our resume of operations very quickly. And as well, a community engagement approach, as we mentioned before, with clear communication, information sharing is important in all of the situation, as is promoting positive learning environment and practice at homes, including reading together and playing together. So in a way, this communication that we need to have with parents, for instance, in the case of COVID, we need to try to see how, understanding the difficulties of some households, how we can try to provide some pedagogical tips to parents in order to, that they can really be serving and supporting their children, for instance, on reading, on playing, creating those dynamics that maybe our kids will be missing when they are out of school. So the last slide, but we think that is very important to take into consideration this. All personnel will undergo annual training on executing the contingency plan. It's very important. As the same like in the evacuation plan, the same like in the standard operation procedures, and the same in the whole school disaster risk management plan. So training will be designed to inform each participant of her responsibilities and those of others, because sometimes we will need to cover others' roles and responsibilities during implementation of these procedures for the contingency plan. School personnel will participate in exercise to test academic, physical, and business systems. So how are we going to use those systems when we are out of the school? And that will be very important, to test those systems, including, for instance, to test a new curriculum that will be a shorter curriculum because of the time constraints, and that shorter curriculum that we will be mentioned on module number 7. And training will include testing the information technology systems and backup data that we need to use. And for instance, how in the case of COVID, okay, we're going to use Zoom, we're going to use Teams, we're going to use another platform. So teachers and administrative staff, they need to know how to use these platforms in order that they can take the most of advantage to it and really make that the pedagogical process is being done in a very smooth way. There is nothing like a present schools. There is nothing like, this communication, this contact. But sometimes, if not, they need to try to understand how to use the tools in order that they can improve their way or adapt the way that they are doing their training in using these tools. So, dear colleagues, thank you very much. We have arrived to the half of the MOOC, the massive online open course on resilience schools and disaster risk reduction education. I hope that you are enjoying this MOOC. Please send emails if you have any questions. Do not hesitate to contact us. I have put in the platform my email, also my Twitter account. If you want to send me a direct message by Twitter or a direct email, I will be able to answer all of your questions. Also, I will suggest to read all the suggested readings There are very interesting examples, for instance, about different countries in different regions, like in Solomon Islands, in India, in Bangladesh, that you can take into consideration concerning, for instance, the contingency plannings. There are the FEMA contingency plannings guidelines, and there are other readings that are very important in order to better understand disaster risk management and Pillar 2. So thank you for your attention, and I will see you on module at the beginning of module number 6. Module number 5 will be provided by my colleague Julia Hayes, as education specialist from the office of Harari, and she will be presenting the 5 different topics on module 5 that will be talking about disaster risk reduction education, and notably this disaster risk reduction education in the bigger concept of sustainable development education, climate change adaptation or climate education for actions, and disaster risk reduction education. So thank you for all of your attention. It has been a pleasure, and see you very soon on the beginning of module number 6. Bye, and have a nice day.